Rabbanit Dr. Liz Shane, to Emily Bell, and to Sophia Grossman for being the wind beneath all of our wings here at SVIVAH tonight and in so many ways. Thank you also to the Covenant Foundation, who constantly encourages us to find ways to bring women together meaningfully and thoughtfully to learn with and from each other. And to the Aviv Foundation, who has been so supportive of HerTorah from the very start. Our first HerTorah was actually 5 years ago. We started with a Pesach program, which is like so amazing to think back to, with Rachel Sharansky Danziger, who taught about what it means to transmit stories from generation to generation. Like, obviously, her parents, she's the daughter of Natan Sharansky. She has amazing stories of Exodus and redemption. And she taught about what it meant for her to be able to take not her story, but her parents' story and transmit that to her children, and that process, and how so much of the seder is that transmission of stories. It was beautiful then, and it is so beautiful now to come together in this way. And I'm actually really curious. I can't see everybody's faces at the same time, but I'm curious if anyone is here tonight who was also here then. Because that was so amazing when we met back in person in Washington, D.C. Crazy. And I think that evening together, actually learning about the importance of sharing our stories, for me, it really laid the foundation for so much of what SVIVAH has become, a space where our stories, our lived experience is equally important to the texts that we may learn or the experience and expertise that is shared. Your stories, your life, the lessons that you've learned, the ways that you've grown. We all want to learn all of that. You are our teachers. We have so much to learn from each other across generations, across distances, across lifestyles and life choices. And I personally find like we don't have enough rooms in which to do that learning. And so this is so very precious to me. I find it remarkable every time when we open our Zoom room how rich the experience and wisdom in the room is. And that is, for me, what makes SVIVAH so special. So as we think about Pesach, when we think about the Haggadah, when we think about, like, it is literal storytelling, when we all come together around this shared peoplehood story, and we think about how we weave our own journey stories into that larger story, I really appreciate this reminder that our tables are full of unique and important stories that I have something to learn from, that it's a gift. Those stories, your stories, are a gift. So thank you for sharing them. Thank you for being a teacher. And thank you to the most wonderful teachers of all, Rabbi Aliza Sperling and Rabbi Dahlia Davis, who put together tonight and all of our programming for the rest of this fabulous month with so much thought and care, thinking about how to help us pull our chairs a little closer to the seder table and to each other. I wish you could have all been part of the many, many conversations and WhatsApps that went into tonight's gathering and next week's gatherings. They're absolutely gifted teachers, especially because they approach their teaching from a space of inviting in the wisdom of others. And I'm so grateful to them both. So thank you. And Rabbi Aliza, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Ariella. 1 minute. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I was also reflecting on how it is our anniversary. And I just want to tell you one thing about how we started. We didn't start on Zoom. We started and we met in person in Washington, D.C. And we worked really hard. We were committed to not being in any specific denominational space, which means like we couldn't rent a certain synagogue because we didn't want people to think that, oh, we are, part of this denomination, but not that one. We wanted it to be a place where everyone felt that they could come in and feel part of it. And so we would rent community centers. And of course, because we had really very low budget, we would come, let's say, hours before we were supposed to start and roll out the tables from the closets and set everything up. And It was really awful. I have to say it was fun, but it was awful. Um, and we did it because we wanted to bring everybody together. We were really committed for SVIVAH to be a place where people, women, anyone who identifies as a Jewish woman would come together. We were committed and we're still committed to the diversity. We think that's what makes it special to be here. We want women from all different backgrounds, denominations or no denomination, ages, locations, income levels, education. We want us all to be together, to talk together, and to be together. We think that's what makes it so special when you come across and have a conversation with someone from who you would probably never really have a deep conversation with otherwise, and you talk about Torah together. We think that's really magic. But one thing that we've noticed as we've gone through and planned is that we really want to bring people together, but sometimes we think, oh, we can't touch that subject because that's going to be too divisive. And we're always thinking, how do we bring people together and really have honest conversation, have them really talk to each other and be together, but have it be a place where people still have those bonds and it doesn't kind of devolve into argument or acrimony. And that little conversation that we're having about SVIVAH, right? We look outside of our little Zoom bubble right now, if you look at what's going on in America or in Israel, around the world, right? We just don't know how to talk to each other. People do not know how to talk to each other. We have a world that's so in need of redemption, and we have people who don't know how to talk to each other. And the hope is that maybe if we learned a little bit more how to talk to each other and communicate with one another, we could bring a little bit more redemption to the world. And that's the idea behind tonight's gathering. We are going to talk about Passover, the holiday of redemption, and we're going to see how some of the elements of redemption in the Passover story and in Seder night, when we say the Haggadah, are about learning how to communicate or learning how to use language, learning how to talk, learning how to listen, right? Learning. And the hope is that tonight we'll learn a little bit of Torah about that. And we'll start to think a little bit about how language and speech can be redemptive. And that next week when we get together, we'll also learn some more practical strategies for how to talk to people across divides, whether they're your family, right, who you're going to see at the seder, or your neighbor who is of a different political persuasion, or anyone else, right? How can language lead to redemption? I'm sure our teachers are going to talk to us a little bit about, well, a lot about how Passover can bring redemption. I just wanted to mention a couple little ways in which there are hints about language and communication, kind of really on the surface. Some people say that the word Pesach, Passover, you can actually divide into peh, mouth, sach, speaking, right? That Pesach is really about this speech. What do we do at the Seder? We say the Haggadah, the telling. Matzah is called lechem oni. Some call it the bread of affliction, but others say that it's the bread of conversation. So there are a lot of hints that there's something going on with speech in the Exodus story, in the Passover story. And if only we could kind of hang on to some of those hints, maybe we could learn a little bit about how to make our world a better place. So in order to get our juices flowing, I'm going to invite you in the chat to think about a piece of text or a quote. It could be a Jewish text, it could be a non-Jewish text, it could be your favorite novel or a poem, maybe something that a friend or a relative said to you once that really stuck with you, like a piece, some language or speech that makes a difference to you, that feels meaningful to you, so that we can start to think about language and speech and the ways that it brings redemption. And of course, the culmination of the Passover story, or one of the culminations, is the receiving of the 10 utterances, the Aseret HaDibrot, right? The 10 pieces of speech at Mount Sinai. So we go through a period of opening our mouths in the Exodus story, and it brings us to God kind of giving us these 10 pieces of speech in return. While you think about that question and write in the chat some things, some words or speech or text that is meaningful to you that you want to share with everyone, I'm going to introduce our first teacher, Rav Maya Zinkow, and you can see her her bio in the chat. I'm going to start by telling you about Rav Maya's, one of her favorite quotes, which is, I am definitely not going to pronounce this poet's name correctly, but by a poet named Katya Maladowski.
You did great.
Oh, great. Okay, so she wrote in women's poems, she wrote, "My life is a page ripped out of a sefer, a holy book, and part of the first line is missing." Really lovely. So Rav Maya is I'm going to see it, is in her third year as the senior Jewish educator at Berkeley Hillel. She received rabbinic ordination and a master's in Jewish women and gender studies at the Jewish Theological Seminary as a Wexner graduate fellow, as well as a special certificate for her studies in Jewish law. While studying at JTS, Maya served as a rabbinic intern at the Columbia Barnard Hillel and at Kilat Romamu on the Upper West Side. You can see the rest of Rav Maya's bio in the chat. Rav Maya, we are so happy that you are here with us to share with us your Torah wisdom and also to tell us a little bit about how this Torah wisdom is coming into practice in your work at Berkeley Hillel.
Thank you so much, Aliza. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Good night for many of you on the East Coast. It's just evening here in Berkeley. So when I was invited into this space to speak on, to teach on Pesach, the redemptive power of speech as it relates to our redemption holiday, what came alive for me is what is very much alive for me in my work right now on campus, and really in the broader American Jewish discourse right now, which is this idea of labeling, of naming, and identity, both in thinking about its power and limitations. And this is something that, my students are really experiencing all the time. There are so many politics around how we identify across the board in so many different ways. There are so many different valences and layers of identity, certainly for Gen Z in general, and then specifically for my Jewish students that I'm seeing who since October 7th have especially been wrestling and struggling with how to identify with regards to their Jewish identities, with regards to their identities towards Israel. And these labels have power and can be empowering in terms of solidarity, in terms of finding comfort. And also what I've seen is that it's also extremely limiting, as Rabbi Aliza referred to earlier, in terms of creating barriers for discourse, right? We don't know how to talk to each other. And I think for me, a part of this is about these labels, even as at times they can be empowering as well. So I really wanted to first to start with just inviting us into an activity to bring you into a little bit of that place of what does it mean to be identified as something, right? Have someone else put an identity on you, which is also something that we're seeing a lot of, both live in real life and also especially on social media, which is where many of my students live, unfortunately. And so I wanted to invite you into reflecting on a time when someone labeled you. someone gave you a label, someone identified you as a part of a certain group. So just to reflect on that for a minute, and then I'll give you further instructions, but just want to give a minute to really to close your eyes if that's available to you, to be in your own body and just invoke a memory of that moment when someone labeled you, identified you as a part of a group. And once you have that experience in your mind, I'm going to ask 2 questions that will populate the chat with some answers. The first is, can you describe something that was empowering about that experience? Something empowering about being identified. And you can throw it up in the chat. An assumption of expertise. Nice. Could never have imagined being identified that way. Feeling validated about a truth. Sense of belonging. Great. Being right. Being someone who is representing something. Beautiful. Right. Being able to accept something about ourselves. Oh, beautiful. Being able to let go of control of self and perception, having authority. So feel free to keep those answers coming. And I want to shift to the other side of what happens when we're labeled and when we're identified beyond our own power, which is what felt limiting about that experience. And some of you already started to allude to this, the pain of that limitation. So what felt limiting about that experience? Being othered, being confined. Being cut off, right? Maybe pigeonholing, right? Being put into that place. I see that these answers I see are coming quicker than the empowerment, which is not a surprise. Lack of nuance, being resented, being stereotyped. Yeah, judgment. Yeah. So I think that both of these realities exist when others label us. And this is present around our Seder table as well, in the Haggadah, in the Magid, specifically with the Arba Banim, the 4 children. The 4 children are characters who don't get to self-identify. They are identified, they're named, they're labeled by an anonymous voice. And I want to bring us into the text now that we've been able to reflect ourselves on a time when we could identify with one of these 4 children, viewing it through that lens of both the empowering possibilities of what happens when we're identified as a part of a certain group, and the limitations of that. So I would love to bring the text up, and I would love 4 volunteers to read each of the 4 children's parts, to embody a wise, a wicked, a simple, and one who does not know how to ask. So would love 4 folks who who are able to come off mute and read. And I'm going to read the first part. Great. I see Cheryl raising your hand. I see Jill raising your hand. Beautiful. I see Sarah, I think, Milner. Beautiful. And then one more. Emily Selman. Great. So Jill, you're gonna read the wise. Emily, you'll read the wicked. These are not, I don't know you, so I'm not I forget who else. Cheryl, you can read the Russia paragraph. Sorry, the Tom, the simple paragraph, and then who am I missing? Did I not assign? And Sarah, you'll read, great, the one who does not know how to ask paragraph. So I'll start us off with the opening of this section of the Magid. And we're going to read in English. I'll switch back and forth. Baruch HaMakom, blessed be the place, blessed be God, blessed be the one who gave the Torah to God's people Israel. Blessed be God. Corresponding to 4 children did the Torah speak, one wise, one wicked, one who is innocent, and one who does not know how to ask.
What does the wise one say? What are these testimonies, statutes, and judgments that the Lord our God commanded you? And accordingly you should say to her, as per the laws of the Pesach sacrifice, we may not eat an afikomen after we are finished eating the Pesach sacrifice.
What does the evil one say? What is this worship to you? To you and not to him. And since he excluded himself from the collective, he denied a principle of the Jewish faith. And accordingly, you should blunt his teeth and say to him, for the sake of this, did Hashem do this for me in my going out of Egypt? For me and not for him, if he had been there, he would not have been redeemed.
What does the innocent one say? What is this? And you should say to them, with the strength of God's hand, did Hashem take us out from Egypt, from the house of enslavement.
And regarding the one who doesn't know how to ask, you should open it up for her, as it is stated, and you will speak to your child on that day, saying, for the sake of this did Hashem do this for me in my going out of Egypt.
Thank you so much to our readers, to our children. So let's go in to a similar mode of questioning. First, empowerment. In the context of this text, how does labeling these children this way empower them? How is this helpful? How is this framework useful for us in understanding who these 4 different archetypes are? And you can feel free to unmute and join in to the discussion. Yeah, Cheryl. And I can't see everyone, so I don't know if there's tech help who's like doing that side of things. So help me.
One thing that I noticed is that the one that doesn't know how to ask, it says, for the sake of this, did Hashem do this for me in my going out of Egypt? Shouldn't it say, did Hashem do this for us in our going out of Egypt?
Sorry, you're looking at
I'm looking at the one who doesn't know how to ask.
Yeah.
Because the way it's worded, the last line, did Hashem do this for me in my going out of Egypt?
Yep.
It's worded the same way as the wording for the evil one.
That is true. Yeah. And do you have an idea of how that might lead to a certain amount of empowerment right, in identifying these folks, these children in that way, what's striking you about that similarity?
I would think that the child that doesn't know how to ask would think that, well, it doesn't apply to me because you're talking about something that was done for you, but not for me.
Right. So that's something that we can notice, right, every year, that even though they're labeled in this way, there's actually a breakdown, because some of them are saying the exact same things. They're just labeled in different ways. I think Emily is going to call on people.
Yeah, so I see Emily Selman has her hand up.
That was from the reading, but I was kind of also thinking, just from that last question raised, also perhaps the one who doesn't know how to ask, like maybe they were influenced by the evil one, for instance, and kind of playing into that identity.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of empowerment and positivity, like, what can we learn from each other when we're being labeled in a certain way? We might actually learn from someone else who is identified as something that we might think is totally different from who we are.
Let's go to Elizabeth Lampert and then Tony.
I think that these identifications help us, it provides us a framework so that we know how to educate or what to offer them.
Beautiful. Yeah. Which is so alive in our tradition elsewhere, right? That we need to, and in the Haggadah, that we should be teaching our children according to their own abilities. Yeah, it can help us for sure. I think we see Tony and Denise. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, so I have a different take on this. There were four daughters in my family, and it was assigned to us by age, who was to read which paragraph. I was the youngest, so I always was the last one. And I found them to be very oppressive. So even though they were clearly supposed to be identifying that everyone has their own personality and viewpoint, and that we're all sitting at the same table, but we see things differently, we experience things differently. But I found that the four of us, because we said these same things every year,
right,
began to believe that we were embodying what was being said. So I think that they were very harmful, and I don't like them at all.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and you're already taking us to that other side of it, right? The limitations of this, which happy to collapse that you're taking us to the next step, which is great, right? And they can be both. It's right, there's diversity around the table. We're experiencing the world in different ways. And right, when we're pigeonholed as something, how do we get beyond that, and how do we not internalize that? And I am also one of four. So I am also the youngest. So strong identification through the Zoom screen, Tony.
So, and also to think of my sister, who was always labeled the evil one. How horrible is that?
Right.
And I have still not convinced her. She's 77 years old, and I haven't convinced her that she is and never has been evil in any way.
Right. It can definitely cause harm. Yeah. And happy again for folks to collapse empowerment limitations. We can open it up. So Denise, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, to me, it's more of, yes, meeting them where they each are in their path. And by meeting them where they all are, each individual on itself, right? You're opening a place for dialogue, for understanding, for learning. Without meeting them in that place, it's very difficult to make each one of these different people understand the meaning of why we are doing what we're doing.
Yeah, we need to understand how people learn in order to meet them where they are, right? They're not going to respond if that's not the case. Sarah.
Sorry, a whole different twist on the one who doesn't know to ask. I love this part because it's inclusion, and I work with people with disabilities, and I think this is a great example of inclusion at the Seder, where everybody's included. And for the person who says to her, this is what they did to me, all those other people get it enough to ask questions or comment on what it means to them. And this person is on a much more basic level, perhaps. And intellectually, the mom or the father has to say, this is what was done for me. Because if you said it was done for the child at that point, you need a lot more explanation, because they know they weren't there. And they don't understand the concept of time. And we're saying this was done to you and it wasn't done. I mean, they don't have that concept. So it's an introduction to say it was done for me, and then what further explanation could take place to help them have a better comprehension with a lot of the great visuals and hands-on and acting out and things that can be done at a Seder to make learning, give everybody an avenue of learning that's meaningful to them on the level where they are.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So one thing I want to take us to further is something that I noticed for the first time reading this text in this context as I'm thinking about it in terms of my students, in terms of the moment that we're in the American Jewish community, is that we don't actually get to see these children talk to each other. Right? What would it look like? What would it look like for these 4 children who are identified by this anonymous other, whether it's the parent or, right, I mean, the midrashist, right, the person who's who created this this telling? What would it look like for them to speak to each other? And I think beyond that, for me, what I'm thinking about, what's needed, right? Maybe there's a reason that they can't talk to each other, and maybe it has to do with the fact that they're labeled as such. What would they need in order to be able to open that dialogue? I'm seeing some folks answer in the chat, which is great. And people should definitely feel empowered to do that, and also to come off mute and answer here too. So, right, common ground. Yeah, Cheryl.
I think they need to know that they all belong at the table and that they all have wisdom to add to the conversation.
Beautiful. A sense of belonging, right? I can't contribute. I might not even be able to make it to the table if someone hasn't signaled to me that I belong. Yeah, Elizabeth, I think I saw you. I don't know if that was an accident.
Yeah, no, at first I thought she was saying what I was going to say, but they would all have to come to the table with respect and openness.
Yeah, goodwill, good intent, which I think so often, and this is something that I'm certainly seeing, there is not a sense of, what we call dan l'chavzchut, right? Assuming good intent, assuming best intent. Definitely not on Instagram, but even in person too, right? We really, not only do we need to have good intent, but we need to assume that is there for others as well. Sarah.
I'm thinking of this kind of in a similar angle as the one who does not know how to ask. But just as for someone who doesn't know how to ask the question, you need to begin for them. If the children don't know how to talk to each other, maybe if someone else could come in and try to facilitate that, or, introduce them to each other, say, that's an interesting thing that your sibling said. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I love that, right? If you have a sibling who doesn't know how to ask, right, at least the wise one, right, should be inviting them into conversation. Yeah, I love that. And I love imagining the conversation that might take place among these 4 siblings. not just because I myself am one of four, but so I can certainly imagine the conversation because we have them. But beyond that, I think it's really important to think about why we don't get to see them talk to each other. And for me, some of this is about the fact that they are not being able to identify themselves. And I think that labels are really powerful and empowering. But as we saw from the difference in the chat answers between what felt empowering about being labeled versus what felt limiting, we need to be able to label ourselves. We need to be able to make names for ourselves, which to me is beautifully communicated in our tradition by this midrash from Kohelet Rabbah, which I'm going to ask Liz to put the text back up on the page on the screen. Thank you so much. So in this Kohelet rabbinic fan fiction, midrash, we have this idea that a person is called by three names, one which they're called by their parents, one which they're called by others, and one which they are called in the records of humankind. And I think that in order for labels and identities to be truly redemptive, we need to be able to harness them for our own learning about ourselves. But beyond that, that we need not step into identities just for identity's sake, but rather use the power they bring in order to engage other people where they're at as well in this expansive experience of what it means to be a human, which I think brings us back to the beginning of this section of the Magid, which Liz, you can put it down again. Thank you so much. Brings us back to the beginning of the Magid, which begins Baruch HaMakom, blessed is the place. God is called the place in this section, which I think signals this idea of all of us having a place in divinity, having a place in humanity. And, whether we are wise, wicked, simple, or a searcher. And so this Pesach around our seder table, I want to bless each of us to use speech to know ourselves, but beyond that, to get to know the godliness in others. So grateful to everybody for sharing and for learning together and for teaching each other.
Thank you so much, Maya. As we were talking about this text before tonight, I realized that, you brought so much to it. Not only have I never thought about the children talking to each other, I never really thought about who labeled the children, right? Like who decided that this child is wise and this child is wicked, right? And then when you brought that midrash at the end, it made me wonder, under whose definition was this one wise and this one wicked, and was this one simple and this one didn't know how to ask? It could be that according to let's say the parents, one of them is wise, but in the history books, right, maybe they're going to be wicked or simple or not knowing how to ask. And it's I wonder what you think about how one can have the freedom or can have the advantages of labels without having the drawbacks. Are there ways to think about that, to wear a label lightly in order to get the good parts, but to be able to stay away from some of these more challenging parts of having a label?
You're asking me?
I figure you're putting everybody else on the spot.
Yeah. Right. Can we step into labels without the baggage? I'm not sure. I mean, I think, I do think that we have to know that there's going to be baggage that comes along with them. But I also think, and this is like connected to my campus work, at some point, I just think these labels are unhelpful. I'm just going to say it. Like the labels of Zionist and anti-Zionist have become completely meaningless in college, in campus discourse to a certain extent. And right, somebody could believe the same things on either end of that spectrum and believe themselves to be enemies. And until one person asks the other, what do you mean by that identity? They're going to stay on opposite sides of the table and never talk to each other. I don't think I'm answering your question, but I might be answering the question that some people want to hear or are more curious about. For me, it's about curiosity. It's about curiosity, and it's like not jumping to the to not giving into the fear that comes when somebody identifies as something, or like or putting them into a box, because I'm like, well, they said this, so they must be, they must identify as such because they said this other thing. So I just do think it has to be a matter of curiosity that allows us to come together, which I think someone shared in the chat around, how do these 4 children get to talk to each other? I think it has to be about genuinely curious. How did you come to identify that way? You're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for this beautiful teaching, and thank you for all the work that you're doing at Berkeley. And thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Rev Maya spoke about really the power of even a single word. If you apply that word to somebody, all of a sudden you give them a label. It's almost like you create them in some way, right? It's almost like this divine aspect of what a person can do with words. We even call God, Baruch She'amar V'haya ha'olam, blessed is the one who said, and the world was created. Tonight we're going to delve a little bit more deeply into the power of words and what it means for words to actually bring redemption with our next wonderful educator, Rabbi Dr. Erin Leib Smokler. And you can see her chat, you can see her bio in the chat. 1 minute. Rabbi Erin is I'll read you part of her bio and then I'll tell you some things about her. Rabbi Dr. Erin Leib Smokler is the Director of Spiritual Development and Publications Editor at Yeshivat Maharat, where she studies Hasidism and Pastoral Torah. She is also a faculty member at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America and at the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. Rabbi Dr. Leib Smokler earned both her PhD and MA from the University of Chicago's Committee on Social Thought and her BA from Harvard University, and she was ordained by Yeshivat Maharat. Rabbi Erin is also a beautiful, deep thinker who has a really big heart and shares her learning and her love with her students, and it's really a privilege for me to work with her and to see her in action. I'm really excited for her to teach us tonight. I did ask her what is a quote that is sitting with her now, and she answered, "Lulei Toratcha Shuai as avadati v'ani." Were not your Torah my delight, I would be lost in my afflictions. From Tehillim, from Psalms 119. So, Rabbi Erin, thank you so much for being with us.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. And it's spectacular to be here with so many amazing other women, a few of whom I might be in conversation with in other contexts, and many of you who I have never met, and just excited to prepare a bit for Pesach with you. I'm gonna switch genres a little bit and bring you into a language that is more my sort of hometown, home territory, and that is a language of Hasidism. So I want to just begin by recapitulating what Rabbanit Aliza said earlier about the nature of Pesach itself as being a holiday that is about speech, be it the name Pesach, meaning the mouth that speaks, or whether it is about the Haggadah at its core, which is the telling, or the charge that gets it all going, of V'higadita levincha, which we just saw in Rav Maya's teaching as well, meaning V'higadita levincha, you shall tell your children. There is an orality to this holiday that seems to be at its core. And the question I want to look at tonight is one reason or one way into understanding that orality, that place, the way that language plays a role in this holiday, which is itself, right, a holiday of redemption. What is the relationship between speech and redemption? So to do that, I'm going to look at a text. I'm going to just open it up. Hold on one second. Everyone see that? I'm going to make it bigger. Whoa, way bigger. How's that? Okay, so arguably, one of the starting points of the story of Pesach, or the story of liberation from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, is here at the beginning of Parshat Bo, where we have this verse. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe bo el Paro ki ani hichbadati et libo ve'et lev avadav leman shiti atotai. Sorry, your faces are all blocking my text. Ella bikirbi, bikirbo, excuse me. Right, God said to Moses, "Go to Paro, for I've hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers, in order that I may display these signs among them." This word, bo el Paro, or this phrase, bo el Paro, where, right, the charge for Moshe to go to Paro, let my people go, that cry begins with this phrase, bo el Paro, which has confused many commentators throughout the generations, because bo means to actually come, not to go. That's translated as go, to come to Paro. And the Hasidic ear hears in that a reason for further inquiry. Come to Paro. Some say, come because God is already there. Come to me. But here's a different perspective that is related very much to our subject of language and words. We begin with, or we will talk tonight about the Hasidic thinker that I'm spending most time with these days, and that is the Me'or Einayim, who is Rabbi Menachem of Chernobyl. You can see his dates down there. An early Hasid, a second or third generation, meaning he both knew the Baal Shem Tov and also was a student of the Maggid of Mezrich. And he, together with his circle, had a very strong sense, generated or inherited through Kabbalah, through the mystical tradition, that language itself is a refraction of God. As Rabbanit Aliza pointed out, right, the first, or the act of creation itself is identified as a speech act, right? Vayomer Hashem vayihi or, right? God said, let there be light, and there was light. And so the way, in some sense, that we are introduced to God is as speaker. And the early Hasidim understood that that meant that language itself was a constitutive part of creation. It was the way that the infinitude of godliness made its way into a finite space, into a space of created beings, us, as well as the rest of created nature, I suppose. But right, God is infinity, Ein Sof. God is so very big. And in order to be able to be communicated, right, God had to shrink God's self or contract God's self. The language is tzimtzum. God had to contract God's self into a communicable way of being. And that was understood as language, as speech. God spoke the world into being because that's the way that God came to be manifest to human beings, through speech. in addition to that very broad, big, abstract theological idea, there was also a sense that not only is spoken language divine, right, but the letters, Hebrew letters themselves, are also, in some sense, contractions of divinity, or maybe containers would be a better word, that letters contain godliness within them. That's a big idea, but here's a very specific application, if you can call it that. The Me'or Einayim notices this Bo El Paro phrase. Again, go to Paro or come to Paro, and says that that bet is the important beginning of redemption.
No.
It's actually in the bet. It says, V'hinei haTorah matzchila bebet bereshit. Okay, we just went from Exodus back to Genesis, right? The Torah itself begins with a bet. So I said broadly, the story of creation begins with a speech act. And now focusing on the letters of that story, right? He notes, like so many others, that the first letter of the Torah is a bet, which is interesting because it's not an aleph, because aleph is first. And why would the Torah not start with the very first letter of the alphabet? And he implies that question and answers, or actually, no, he says it, sorry. V'lama lo hitzchila haTorah be'alef shehu rishon l'chol ha'otiyot. Right? Why didn't the Torah start with an aleph? Mipnei shelo haya ha'olam yachol hitkayem afilu sha'a achat v'haya batel mimetziut mipnei godel bihirut ot aleph. I'll step out of the text because I think maybe those are too many words for us right now. He says that the reason why the Torah began with a bet, why it began in sort of second place, so to speak, right, is because the aleph represents oneness. It represents pure godliness. And we as human beings can't actually access that. We can't say that which is unsayable. We can't think that which is unthinkable. We need containers. God is identified as Aleph. God is also identified as Alufo Shel Olam, which means the chief of the world, or I believe it's translated here as champion of the world. But Aluf often means, right, chief, leader, Alufo Shel Olam. So the point here is that we can't actually directly engage with God. And sometimes we can't even directly engage with one another. We are limited by that which can be spoken. We need to be able to contain, to find, again, kind of concrete isn't quite right, but ways of actually being in communication, addressing one another, addressing God, experiencing something that is more human scale, essentially. How is this related to Bo El Paro? So he says here, well, I'll just keep going here. V'ratzalo mar kimoshe b'shemesh efshar litzkayem mipnei godel bihirut ot ha'alef shehu alufo shel olam rak al yedei mechsa umagen shehu ot bet. And now he says, v'zeh Bo El Paro ratzel amar al yedei habet yeh ha'alef batorah. He notices that the bet of Bo, and again, come to Paro, the argument here, the implicit argument is this is where redemption begins. When God says to Moshe, go, get this story going, get the redemption moving. The suggestion here is the Bo is come into the world of bet. Come into the world of earthliness, of actually non-redemption or lack of clarity. Come into this place, this very human place, the space of creation, the space of imperfection. That's where our story begins. But it begins there to get us to a place of alephs. Bo is enter with bet, enter through the portal And people often notice that the bet is like, can be seen as a doorway going in one direction. In any case, right? Enter with the bet to get to a place of Aleph. That's all very abstract. The reason why I wanted to share this tonight and share it in thinking about Pesach, the mouth that speaks on Pesach, is because it seems to me that this introduction of bo, of come through the bet to the Aleph, it means go through language in order to get to an Aleph, which is itself beyond language. We must actually engage in letters upon letters, words upon words, songs upon songs, questions upon questions, right? If we actually want to go through the muddy, messy waters, and here I don't actually mean the waters of Kriyat Yamsuf, but actually, right, the pathway of bet is the pathway of speech, is the pathway of, again, imperfection. That the redemption story is not a clean one, and it is not a simple one, and it is not one that is not beset by all kinds of, again, human ickiness, right? Whether that involves, right, the resistance of the Jewish people, the plagues set upon enemies, and maybe the moral complexities therein, all of the messiness and the hesitation and the years of suffering that preceded, all of that's part of the story. You never start with Aleph. You can't have access to total clarity, to total brilliance, as described here. The Bihirut Ota Aleph means like the brilliance of the Aleph, the light of the Ein Sof. We humans can't do that. If we want to find our way through the Mitzrayims and through our narrow places, we have to go by way of the bet, which is by way of language, by way of speech, by way of human, again, communication. And I want to suggest to you that there is an arc here, an arc that is noted by Rabbi Soloveitchik, among others, that within the story of Pesach, we also witness the Jewish people coming into voice, finding, right, they cry out, but where have they been for all the hundreds of years beforehand? They presumably did not have a voice, but they came into a voice on Pesach. Part of coming into that voice was actually owning their pain, being able to articulate somehow, even if it was just a groan, a vayizak, right? It was just a groan of pain, some kind of vocalization, right? That actually enabled, again, the story to be set in motion, the communication to happen, the beginnings of the salvation seem to be laid through the capacity, again, to make some utterances. But I also want to suggest that on the other side of that, there is a push as well beyond that, that our story and the story of Pesach, right, is a story of, again, of speech, of orality, of the capacity to tell stories, to tell our own stories, to be able to maybe listen for the stories of others as well. But Pesach is also, and I know we just finished with Purim, it's hard already to not only jump to Pesach, but I want to say a word about Shavuot as well. And Rabbanit Aliza also foreshadowed this when she mentioned the Aseret Hadibrot. The Aseret Hadibrot, right, the 10 utterances or the 10 commandments that are right, associated with Shavuot and the giving of the Torah. There is an alternative read, and this certainly deserves more than 5 minutes, but I want to give you a hint, and I did it by way of a rabbinic text, even though what I have in mind is the ways that the Hasidim also would understand this rabbinic text, but it's too much to put on a source sheet. One of the important, and I think one of the themes that really is found again in early Chassidut with regard specifically to those 10 utterances is the way in which they actually were not utterances at all. And what does that mean? Again, drawing perhaps on this statement from Masechet Shabbat, there's a recognition that, speaking of bets, the Aleph is the first letter of the 10 commandments, or of those 10 utterances. And it begins with the word Anochi. And the Rabbi Yochanan in this text here suggests that Anochi is an acronym, is a notricon, or abbreviation it says here, but an acronym for a phrase unto itself, right? That the Aleph of Anochi is Ana, and the Nun is Nafshe, and the Chaf is Katvet, and the Yud is Yahavet. Ana, Nafshe, Katvet, Yahavet, which here is translated as I myself wrote and gave this, the Torah, the commandments that follow. Hasidim understand this in a different way. And I know it's not really fair to say Hasidim, but there are those. Multiple Hasidic thinkers understand the Anochi to be not I gave the Torah to you, but I gave myself to you. I, God, Anochi, Ana Nafshe, I, God, gave my nefesh, God's soul, okay? I wrote it, I gave it to you. I wrote it down here and I gave it to you, or I put it in these letters, you might say, and I gave it to you. And the understanding there, right, is that all of those words and all of those letters are their own commentary on what is fundamentally the revelation of just the Aleph. What happened at Sinai, or maybe we'll say differently, what is it that we mark when we mark Shavuot? What is it that we mark when we mark Revelation? We mark Ana Nafshe Katvet Yahavet. We mark the unbelievable and incommunicable reality or claim, right? That God gave God's self in some unmediated way, perhaps, through that Aleph alone. And I want to suggest to you that as we approach Pesach, our Pesach, as we get our mouths speaking, and it is important and it is necessary and it is crucial for any freedom to be unleashed, for any real connections and conversations, obviously, to happen, there must be an articulation of the nature of the pain. There must be a communication to another about that. There must be a freedom within the self to actually cry out, to be able to find, whether it's sounds or words, to be able to just notice, right, what it is that one needs redemption from, right? That is the beginning of a process, and Pesach celebrates that beginning of a process. And we all know that Pesach and Shavuot are connected through Sfirat HaOmer, right? I just want us to think about the possibility that as we really celebrate speech and put a lot of it into action, sitting around our seder tables till all hours, right? That as we celebrate speech and as we celebrate the possibilities of what language can unleash, we also understand that this arc, as understood by the Hasidic tradition, is actually the beginning of the redemption story that finds its apex on Shavuot, that yes, marks the Aseret HaDibrot, but ironically and importantly, is actually a celebration of that which cannot fully be articulated, because God in God's fullness, right, can actually be accessed just a little bit, right, through the Aleph. The Aleph is this big letter on some level, Alufo Shel Olam, and the Aleph, importantly, is one that has no vocalized sound unless it has, well, vowels underneath it, right? So there is an understanding that the ultimate revelation, we might say that the ultimate communication is the ability to actually somehow get beyond that language. But Pesach comes with all of its talk and all of its text and all of its conversation to remind us and to emphasize the divinity of language itself, the necessity of language to be able to reach places of freedom, expansion, to get out of places of narrowness. And also, as we, again, mark that journey, we recognize it's not dayenu, it's not quite enough. But we note that there is also on the other side, an even higher place, perhaps, where words might not be necessary, where we might actually be able to communicate to God and communicate with one another, actually, in ways that are not linguistic, but deeply attuned and nuanced to, again, the holiness of the world and the holiness of one another. And with that, I will stop.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Erin, for that beautiful teaching. I was scribbling down as you were speaking. I scribbled a lot down, and one thing that you said is that you can never start with Aleph, with perfection. If we want to find a way through our narrow places, we have to go by way of the Bet, through human language. And that resonated so much for me personally, because I think of all the ways in which, I try to make connections with the people in my life who I really want to find like that unity or that coming together. And there are so many starts and stops with language, and so much of it just feels so even false. Like, hi, how was your day? Do you need money? To my children who are in college, right? What did you do last night, right? It's like the language itself even feels insufficient for what I'm trying to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you have, I'm so relieved to hear that it's a process, right? That we start with Passover and it takes a while to get to where you want to go. But how does that happen, right? Like how do you move from those little starts and stops to get to a place of more connection when like the tool itself, the language, especially for some of us, I think for some people the language comes easier, but for some of us it's hard to get there.
So I'll say somewhat humorously, wine. And I actually, but I want to say something serious about that too, which is, and I don't actually drink any wine, just don't like it. But the idea of, I think, seder as storytelling space and long storytelling space. In my community growing up, there used to be a kind of competition for who stayed up the longest, and my seder went till midnight, but mine went till 1. And that is both, child's play, and it's also the, I think, a recognition, right, that sometimes things just really take time, and we just get going sometimes at midnight. I oftentimes feel that way about my seders, that they're really boring until the end, and all the songs come out, and then the people are tired, and that's when like our truths begin, and all the wonderful preparation that the children have done, all the prefab kinds of divrei Torah or Torah tellings, or I don't know how to translate that right this moment, right? But they fall away, and then like the truth comes out, or right. And so I think that on the one hand, that sort of that mythical table that is the seder, that space that we sit together, we sit with people we want to be with, we sit with people we don't necessarily want to be with, that we're comfortable with, that we're not comfortable with, that we identify with, that we don't identify with, to refer back to Rav Maya's teaching. And we stay there. We just stay there. And what happens on the other side of that is, I think, where the real speech and maybe the beyond speech begins. And so I said about the wine somewhat jokingly, but I do sometimes wonder whether that's actually kind of a tool to get beyond language. And also this particular move, if you will, or the rhythm of moving from inhabiting language to moving beyond language is something that is very much alive in the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Bretzlav. And he's someone who's also known for wordless song or nigunim. And so sometimes I also think, right, our seders oftentimes end with song. Sometimes they're very wordy songs and sometimes they're nigunim. And that too is sort of part of the journey from sitting there, and I know every family does it differently, but make sure you read every word or not. But lots of words that then yield to, I hope, at its best, I think, right, honest conversation, and then maybe no conversation at all, but just wordless song, and yeah, a sense of togetherness that doesn't necessarily need to be spoken anymore.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Rabbi Dalia, you and I have been talking about speech for a few weeks already. And I was wondering what resonated for you tonight, listening to our wonderful educators.
Thank you. First of all, both of you taught so beautifully tonight. I have pages of notes sitting next to me that I'm so excited to read through and to bring to my seder. I was thinking a lot about, as Rav Maya was talking about, like, what would it be like for the children to speak to each other? And I even saw it in the chat. Somebody asked, what would it be like to change the answers that the children receive? And can we shift the way that we're talking to them and to each other? And it's really interesting to think about, how can we open dialogue between people who really struggle, and who are the people that we really struggle to talk to, and how can we kind of open that up for ourselves? What do we need in order to do that? And then to connect that to what Rabbi Erin just taught, I'm so struck by the idea of that it couldn't be the aleph, it had to be the bet. And when you were saying that, what rose up for me was the idea of bet is two, aleph is singular. And if we're really going to have a conversation, then both of us have to come together, and we have to figure out, I might have this perspective and you might have that perspective, or we might have the same perspective, but we labeled ourselves differently. And whatever it is that we need to kind of figure out and set aside in order to have that duality be able to come together, that's, I think, the process that I'm really excited to think more about and to engage in.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really beautiful. I want to invite everybody here, if you want, to put on the chat maybe something that that you're taking away from tonight, a teaching that spoke to you, and maybe explain why. And I'm also at the same time going to invite you to reflect beyond like these really inspirational words. And we know that sometimes it feels like that like language just can't do it, right? That there are instances where we're going to be with somebody and we've tried so hard to speak to them, and we've tried so many different ways of communicating with them, and it just doesn't seem to work sometimes. So I want us to like really honestly reflect on something that we're taking and something that we feel is still a challenge. I'd love to see what you write in the chat. kind of a big question to ask you at 9:37 at night. Yeah, crying out as a form of language, noticing what we need redemption from. Yeah, connecting speech and action. Labels can be limiting, and we need to listen to one another. To read the Haggadah twice, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think we all kind of know. Let's see, I think about how we use so many words to try to connect. Sometimes the words interfere with the aleph, with the feeling each other. You need voice, not just words. Fascinated by the idea of our many names and how we carry identity in our names and what it means to have many names and contain multitudes. What am I really hearing from the silence of a teenager? Oh, I'd love to know. Yeah. Right, and what are they communicating? Language is necessary but not sufficient. What would it look like for the 4 children to speak to each other? Yeah. Pesach celebrates our need for language to get out of narrowness, the need for the mundane to come first to get to the spiritual, the ability to listen, right? Reading the Haggadah more carefully. Yeah, there's so much we can do. And in some ways, Rabbi Erin, I feel like all of us are praying like every day. All we really want is the aleph. We want the aleph in between ourselves. We want the aleph in the world. We want the aleph in our relationship with the divine. And we're stuck instead with all these like guttural letters, right? Like it just feels like we're stammering and we want to get somewhere and it's so hard to get there.
And that maybe, right, and that maybe redemption is not an experience of alephness, but actually the best we can for it is bet, and that's where we are. Yeah, I think about other images of redemption also that the rabbis give us, you know, Mashiach on a donkey, but the donkey poops. There's this really odd image in the Talmud about that. And there's just such I love that image. I know that's a really odd one to love, but I do, because it's all messy. Even our greatest imaginings of redemption are a little messy, a little dirty, a little heavy, a little too wordy. That's all part of, right? Redemption is not immediate, immediate alephness, right? It goes by way of that.
Yeah, thank you. I as somebody who has a dog who doesn't really respect when she should go inside or outside, I relate to that very much.
Redemptive, you didn't know.
It's redemptive. Yes, thank you. Rabbi Natalia, can you tell us what's coming next, please?
Yeah, so I'm gonna riff off of what Rabbi Erin said about the 2 a.m. seder and say that I feel like our seder began tonight and it's going to continue. And the next installment is going to come on next Tuesday night on April 9th, where we're going to have a program called Connected Conversations, coming to the table across difference. And we are going to have the incredible privilege to hear from Dr. Michelle Friedman, who is a psychiatrist, and she's also an expert in pastoral counseling. And she's going to really help us think about what do we need to know in order to engage in these difficult conversations when we can't figure out what words we want to say, when we can't figure out how to get past barriers. She's going to talk in practical terms and give us some tools. There's going to be some exciting and very lively role plays for us to engage and witness and observe and contemplate. And hopefully we're going to walk away with that night feeling like we are still in the process, but we're on our way towards being ready to engage at our seder table and beyond with any conversations that we might encounter from now and forward. And then furthermore, even later on our process in the Seder, we have that same week, next Friday on the 12th, we have our next installment of Spiritual Office Hours, where you have the opportunity to spend 20 minutes with a chaplain, a rabbi, a spiritual leader who is there really just to listen to you, to hold whatever it is that you want to share, and to offer spiritual guidance if that's what you're seeking. And please sign up for a slot. We have 4 people ready to be there with you, and we look forward to being there for you, with you, and to prepare for Passover together in that way.
I want to kind of like just take a nanosecond, to more than a nanosecond, to thank our amazing teachers. Thank you, Rabbi Erin. Thank you, Rev Maya. Thank you, Aliza. Thank you, everybody, for everything that was in the chat. Like, I hope that you were able to read along with everything that so many of you shared. I want to pull back the curtain for a second, because I had the honor and privilege of working with Dahlia and Aliza when they thought about how to approach April. And the whole idea of both of them being so thoughtful about how we were going to walk into Pesach, which is a big holiday on the calendar, a big moment in community life and family life, in our celebration of Judaism and all of those things in our history. It's just heavy on a good year. And this one is so far, the jury's still out. But I so appreciated the 2 of them thinking so thoughtfully about what we needed as we're walking into this holiday, how we needed to kind of empower is the wrong word, but like really prepare ourselves for this holiday that we come to year after year, that just like by the repetitiveness of it brings about reflection and kind of compare and contrast from the year before. There's so much of that. And I'm so grateful to both of you, Aliza and Dahlia, for bringing these beautiful teachers to us, for giving us this opportunity to really think about how can we take this holiday, how can we take this moment in time, how can we take this year, how can we take this celebration of peoplehood in whatever way we want to define what that means, and use it and our conversation around the table and our connection to others around the table to make our little corner of the world a little bit better. And I'm so grateful to both of you for thinking about that it's so much more than whether or not your matzo balls are floating, and whether or not you're, like Ari and I grew up in that corner of the universe too, where it was always a competition for how long your seder went. But really thinking about how do we show up in a way at this table that it leaves the world a little bit better, even if it's just that, like, however big your table is, that little corner of the world is improved by whatever it is that we are bringing to it. So thank you for tonight, for equipping us with what to bring to the table to do so, and for starting our wheels turning to think about how we want to show up in the table in that way. And also Dahlia and Aliza for knowing that even that is not enough, that this year we need practice and skills and different kind of muscle flexing to really do that hard work, that it's not just coming with beautiful Torah, but it's also figuring out how to talk, how to use those words, how to find those letters, those guttural sounds and making them pleasing, learning how to listen, all of that. I'm so appreciative of this like all-encompassing empowerment that you're giving us so that we can come to our seder tables, our communities, our gatherings, all of our interactions a little bit better, a little bit stronger, and try to make things a little bit sweeter. I'm so grateful to all of you.